Some of you guys know me. Some of you don't. My name is Ben Harshyne. I appreciate Scheels having me. This is quite a privilege to have a brand support me and say, hey, we want you to come and talk about, some things that you're interested in. And so, no shocker, we're going to talk about deer and the land that they roam and the habitat that they, prefer. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in coal mine country, went to Penn State, got a mapping degree, cartography. Yes, that's still a field. And it took, once I graduated, we moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked there for 7 years in the intelligence community, making maps at the National Counterterrorism Center. And so it's a high-pressure environment. It was an amazing 7 years. And for Father's Day in 2009, I made a map for my dad of the land that we hunted together in Western PA, rolling hardwood timber, and you really couldn't tell much from a normal aerial map. And I was able to use my mapping skills that I learned over the last 7 years and basically make a map look three-dimensional, and it told you a lot more about the topography of hill country. And so it turned into a little side business that turned into a legitimate online business, HUNTERRA Maps. And it ended up getting to the point where we decided we're going to leave Washington and move to the Midwest because of my passion for deer. It was more affordable to live in the Midwest than Washington. It's where my heart needed to be. And so I started HUNTERRA Maps. We still own and operate it today, my wife and I. And in that journey, my first corporate account and relationship was with Whitetail Properties Real Estate. And that would have been in 2010, pretty much when I started the company, when I started HUNTERRA. And so today I'm a Whitetail Properties land specialist. I help people buy and sell land across southeast Iowa. And so a lot of my, career blends with my passion for deer and habitat and land and working with people. I love to work with people. And so between these two avenues, I've been able to engage a lot with people that know a heck of a lot more than me when it comes to land. But I've gathered a lot of good information over the years. I've had some great mentorship and got my own hands dirty, working ground, trying to improve it for deer. In the back here is Micah Rinke. Micah is my right-hand man. He helps me literally with everything that I'm involved in, whether it's HUNTERRA, my listings, and most importantly, managing the few farms that we're involved in. We're involved in about 2,200 acres across 4 different farms in southeast Iowa, managing for premium whitetail habitat here. Some of the bucks that I've taken over the years, just to prove a little bit of credibility, I suppose. In my opinion, there's, score is like the quantifiable measurement of success, and I just don't agree with that, right? So to me, these are 9 trophies of memories that really matter to me. A couple of them have been shared with great friends in the tree together. That's Austin Thomas there, my buddy on the top, who filmed me kill that buck on the top there in the beginning of November. I actually shot the buck in the very bottom from that same tree, so that was an excellent tree for a rut stand. Micah filmed me kill this guy here last year. We hung a stand and shot that buck a couple hours later, and so all of this is about making memories, in my opinion. And so we can get all caught up in whether we kill a big deer or not, but we're missing the point if we're not having fun and pushing ourselves. Okay, today's topics, what we're going to go over. We're going to talk about a lot, I suppose, and I can jump through some of this other stuff quicker, but in general, we're going to talk about some of the fundamentals of whitetails. We're going to go through the 2 main topics here are going to be cover and food. Cover sources, food sources, herd management. And so I think that's a good holistic way to look at, if you're trying to improve ground, you got to look at the cover and where they seek shelter, what they like to eat, and then managing the amount of them in the age class that's there. We all know this is how they survive, right? They smell, they see, they hear, and they eat. A lot of our decisions should be revolve around, from a hunting perspective, mainly trying to understand how you can fool these things. But it's good to really start at the very beginning here. Our mission is to enjoy growing and chasing and making memories with these animals. You might have a goal of more deer, right? Or you might just have a goal of shooting bigger deer, right? And there's a couple different approaches, I suppose. But think about your goals and how they relate to the fundamentals of the deer, and try to. I'm not going to really get into the fine details of really any of this stuff. I think we're going to cover a lot of topics when it comes to their nutrition, for example. There's a lot that you can go into. But anyways, fundamentals of deer: nutrition, security. They need water. They need to be able to communicate with each other, mainly with scrapes and staging areas and rubs and trails and whatnot. They need space. They need low pressure. They need to not be bothered with, right? And so that's the life of a deer. That's what they need. As deer managers, we should be hunting, observing, taking note, planning things in the fall and winter. A lot of planning goes on in my head when I'm sitting in the tree, thinking about what I can improve on that corner of the field there, or how come they're that far away and I'm maybe not in the game, or the deer that I expected to be seeing is not coming. And so I'm planning a lot in the fall and winter, and then post-season you're doing a lot of your scouting, right? So you learn, and I feel like probably the majority of big deer that are killed on purpose are killed during the off season. You're observing and learning, and then you're going into the different parts of the farm that you may not go into during the season, and you're trying to learn more about how they like to use ground. And then in the winter time, everything is just so exposed, the leaves off the trees and the trails are all beaten down. You could just learn a lot that time of year. And then of course, come spring and summer, we've got our field work. We work on food plots, and we do our burning and our timber work, and then come fall, we're back at it. We're learning and repeating and enjoying. And that's, again, I try to stress that because I feel like I don't hear that enough in the hunting space. And this is all about having fun, in my opinion. A lot of it can be frustrating, but it's all about pushing yourself and looking forward to something. Okay, deer management. Deer management is herd management and land management. Herd management is making decisions to reach your goals of either having more deer or having more big bucks, or potentially both. I think that if you have too many deer, you're not going to necessarily express the most potential out of any one animal's rack, if that's your goal. I think that ultra big deer get that way by being old. Old deer don't like being around a million other deer. They just don't. Most of them don't. And so managing that herd, keeping it balanced, good healthy herd, you're going to have your best whitetails. And then land management, making decisions to manipulate the vegetation to improve the desirability of deer to want to be on your farm. And especially during daylight hours, I think that's a big key. Land management is making decisions that manipulate why they want to be there. And so it's a bunch of things, right? And then finally, deer management is being realistic with what you're working with. I own 42 acres. I just bought it not too long ago. Pretty much all timber, 39 acres. I don't expect to have tremendous late season hunting on that farm. I'm going to manipulate that quarter section to have good rut hunting. And so I'm trying to be I'm being realistic with what I'm working with. I won't have any place in that timber to grow a large amount of acres for a late season draw. Combined with the amount of deer that are there, And so instead of trying to force, what I would like, I'm just going to play off the cards that I'm dealt, and I'm going to try to make it a really good bow hunting property. Cover sources. This is a pretty cool picture here. A lot of these photos are taken either by Micah or my friend Austin, the two guys I pointed out. In the business I'm involved in with HUNTERRA and with Whitetail properties, photography is really important. And so I'm surrounded by guys that shoot a lot of cool National Geographic style imagery, in my opinion. And so this is kind of cool here. Can you see the buck back there working the edge of the switchgrass along the edge of timber? Cover, timber, native grasses, prairie. Cover. Cover is the habitat and vegetation where deer spend most of their lives. Okay, so in general, there's bedding cover and travel cover. That buck right back there, he's traveling, right? But he might have been bedding in one of these places. So cover is where they're spending most of the time. In general, maybe it changes across the whitetail spectrum, but they eat 4 times a day, so they're getting up, they're browsing a little bit, and they're laying back down. They're getting up and browsing a little bit, and then eventually come afternoon, they're getting up and they're going on their big main, dinner and communication event. Most of the time they're spending of the day is in cover. And so there's really, in our part of the world, there's kind of 2 types of cover that matter to deer here: prairie, plain, savanna. I'm lumping those all together in open country, field country, right? In forest or timber. That's going to change as you go further down south or further to the east. But in general, today, everybody here is pretty much looking at managing open ground in their timber. Many parts of the Midwest used to be prairie or oak savanna. So prior to John Deere, right, there was big, vast areas of open country that was managed by Mother Nature over eons, but pretty much by fire, right? And so the Great Prairie and Oak Savanna, there are still remnants of it, but there's really not very much of it here anymore. There have been farms that I have been on, and I haven't been able to identify it, but luckily I was with a person that got pretty pumped because they found remnant species of remnant prairie or oak savanna. So there's still a little bit of it out there. But in general, when we're talking about this kind of stuff, a lot of people think native grasses, right? So native grasses, switchgrass, Indian grass, big blue stem, anything that's short up or up tall. Native grasses, deer like that. Now, one of the things we should think about is, do we like monoculture or diversity? As a wildlife enthusiast, we like diversity. I think monoculture is easy, and sometimes monoculture is important because if you want to have a good late season food source, yeah, you want 10 acres of soybeans, right? Monoculture, that's fine. But in general, I'm a diversity guy. Things that we'll talk about here like CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. There's 30 species in a CRP mix. Okay, so grasses and flowers, they're not preferred food sources. That's important to note. They're not going to browse your grass. They might pick and nibble at this stuff, but in general, this is not a food source. And we're going to manage our grasses with fire. You can mow them. But fire is going to be one of our most essential tools as a land manager. Okay, playing off our native vegetation here in our prairie, CRP. CRP is important to talk about because all of us probably, has anybody not heard of CRP here? Yeah, so everybody understands to an extent. Conservation Reserve Program, it exists to financially incentivize landowners to remove their highly erodible land out of traditional agricultural production. So it prevents erosion and it protects our watersheds. As land managers and deer managers, we're going to encounter CRP. There's rules that we need to follow because the government is giving us a payment, right? But a little bit more about it because I run into a lot of people that kind of understand, but not really. And in my line of work, transacting land, we've got to dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's with this program so that our clients continue to realize the payments and not get fined. There's two families. There's the general, and then there's the continuous group. General is more your big open field. So somebody says, oh, that's a CRP field over there. And then there's the continuous, which are more like filter strips and areas along creek bottoms and waterways and that kind of stuff. 10 to 15 year contracts, and normally they pay about 80% of the county average rental rate. They require maintenance, and they may not allow food plots. So this is kind of out of the CRP slide is kind of out of the box, but I think it's important to talk about because I don't run into many farms that doesn't have some sort of CRP, quite frankly. Okay, here is a map of a farm that I converted a good bit of this into CRP. And so this was a really rough tillable farm in Jefferson County. The neon green outlines or fire breaks are dark coloring inside of all this green is in CRP now. This was a tremendous project, and I learned a lot doing so. But this is just a good example of some of maybe the sensitive areas. You can see we left like this part of the farm right here, nice flat ground up near the road. Left that into production a little bit over here. This is a decent field. This stuff probably should have gone in as well, but we're taking all of this edge, all of these little coves where water's just running off, and we're putting that into conservation reserve program. And what this is making now, we've gone from a monoculture of row crop, and now we're breaking the farm up. When in all reality, before we planted this in CRP, a good sit for me on this farm would have been, maybe seeing 5 deer, right? That will change soon because of what we've done here. That's pretty exciting to me. And so we're going to talk about if you do have CRP, we're going to talk about fire breaks. Here's an example. This nose right here in that pond is basically the drone is looking this way. And so this pond and this nose is right here. Fire break, 30 foot wide. This is a cool season grass. Cool season grasses would be alfalfa, clover, Timothy grass. That's basically what the blend of this is. And the fire break is important for a couple reasons. When we manage our CRP with fire, we want to control it. We want to be safe. And so our fire breaks are the first things greening up from the dormancy period. So if we're going to burn in the dormant time, these fire breaks are going to serve as a way for us to burn without it necessarily worrying about it getting into the timber. It's not a fail-safe, right? But it's a very important tool to be able to burn safely, in my opinion. It's also creating a really nice lane. The government wouldn't want me saying that, but call a spade, that's what it is, because we keep these mowed and we can get across the farm now, right? So now we can access different parts of our farm. And the deer, they got a little clover there, and the birds and the wildlife, they like getting into those lanes. You can run cameras and you can get a lot more information on these fire breaks. So if you're ever going to set up your farm and you want to put it into CRP, do fire breaks. Plus it's beautiful. Look at that. I mean, that looks like a sculpted, that looks like it was done intentionally. And so what used to be just this big old ridge of junk tillable ground, we kept the ridge in corn and soybeans, right? But now all of the sides are going to be in good bedding grasses, and we've got our fire breaks. And so now we've got a lot more diversity here. I would encourage anybody to incorporate fire breaks if you enroll your ground into CRP. When you burn, there's actually 2 different periods here. Let's see if it's in this. Yeah, I've got it here. So a lot of people know about burning, right? How are we going to manage our grasses? We're going to burn all this stuff. In fact, we burned it this year. We planted this in 2020, in the fall of 2020. A lot of people will plant their native grasses in the spring. We planted in November. Mother Nature, she sows her seed. When it comes to the prairie and the native grasses, Mother Nature sows her seed in November. Okay, and she doesn't drill her seed into the ground, she drops it onto the ground. Right, so that's what we mimicked, and it turns out that we had a tremendous first year in 2021 of growing, and we had some wet conditions. We got permission to let everything grow up, and they said next year burn it, and it was a lot of foxtail duff, but we burned it this spring, and those fire breaks served as a really good thing here. Okay, so burning is a natural way to manage grasslands. It eliminates the undesirable species in the woody vegetation, and it thickens the stand. So you're going to have other things competing for that sunlight, competing against your native grasses, which are slow to start. They stratify. They grow down first into the soil, then they grow up. And so we use fire to eliminate the competition. The dormant season burning right now in this late winter, early spring is for mainly burning duff off, a tuft of grass that grows up, greens up, dies, falls over, and now it's duff. It's thatch. It's basically covering the ground. We're burning that, and then we're also site prepping. Is normally why you burn in the spring. A lot of people do it because they don't want to burn in the late summer because it's hot as hell outside, right? But you can do a growing season burn, and if you do that, and you get the fire hot enough and it goes across your field, you're going to kill the woody vegetation if that's your goal. It'll burn the cambium layer, and we'll go through a little bit of this when we get into forestry. But if you have trees in your CRP, you can burn during the growing season, and that'll deplete its ability to grab nutrients the next year. And so when you manage trees, you're burning them late summer, early fall. Burn with fire breaks, we went over that. Backburn, we're going to talk about backburning next. We're going to when you burn, you pay attention to the conditions. That's critical. You need to use a team, blowers, water tanks, radios, safety. Nothing more dangerous than fire. Okay, so here's a couple of our tools here, right? We're burning a lot of acres. So the main guy, Mike Pasha, one of the most experienced CRP operators in all of southern Iowa. This guy here, he's running the drip torch, setting the fire on the backburn. So our wind is coming this way. He's setting the fire on the downwind side. And then as you can see, this fire break here is really not too green. We probably burned a little bit early. You can see a little bit of remnants of a little bit of green popping through. So it was working, but you can't see that well in the photo. But I'm coming back and blowing out any of the remnant flames so they don't creep across and go somewhere where we don't want them to go. Back burning, you can see we're setting the back burn right here. Okay, so our wind, look at the smoke, it's coming from this direction. We're back burning first. It's creeping in. We're creating an extra back layer. So this is a second layer of safety. That's why we do this. So we've got our first layer of safety is our fire break. The second is our back burn. And then of course we have the team following it with blowers and water, all working together here. Once we get a good black line, then Mike will come around and look how much burned in this section here, right? And he hit this before up there, but once you catch the wind, and if it's at a good speed, that fire is going to carry fast, right? And it's going to get hot. And so it can be a tremendous tool, really quick, to eliminate what we're killing here is foxtail. That's our first year weed, volunteer, that we don't want in our CRP mix. We're killing that from the first year. And now, as soon as the rain hit, a little bit of heat, here come the natives. Planting natives. Small seeds, they need to be planted shallow. There's specific implements for planting CRP seed, native grass seed. You can also broadcast and pack it in, right? Again, so we're mimicking Mother Nature. So if you don't have a drill, you don't have somebody that can help you out, if you prep your site ahead of time, you can broadcast this seed and pack it in with some sort of roller. Use your four-wheeler tires to try to push it into the ground. We're not planting this stuff deep at all. You got to think a year ahead of time, pretty much like anything when we're managing, right? We're thinking about next year because we're fighting the elements and we're fighting the growing season. And so native grasses especially want to think a year ahead of time. And if you are going to plant native grasses, you want to normally try to come in after soybeans, if you have the ability to do that, because bean stubble is an easy, good way to that's not going to interfere as you're planting those seeds. Mimic Mother Nature, we talked about that. Consider planting in the fall. Some people say that's unconventional, but I think we prove otherwise. And some of the different things you can use: a drill, Brilliant seeder, or a broadcast. Okay, so forestry and timber, managing timber. What are we doing when we're talking about timber stand improvement, hinge cutting, logging, some of these different topics that come up for a landowner or a land manager? So cutting a tree, what you're doing is you're creating a different response in that tree's growth structure. So we're diving pretty deep here, but cutting a tree is essentially this: you're altering the response of it and the surrounding vegetation. How you cut, where you cut, how much you cut, and what you cut will dictate the response. So we're changing the response of the forest, or we're changing the response of a single tree. The goal is to create a response that will result in achieving your goals. That's kind of a redundant sentence right there, but essentially you ask yourself two questions. Do you want to have more valuable trees? Do you want to someday have a beautiful stand of big mature white oaks and a creek bottom of mint condition walnuts that you're going to basically have your kids log for good money? Right? Or would you rather improve the bedding and the browse and make it ultra desirable to deer? Because these are two different goals right here. You can have a property that has both, where you favor areas that have better quality species of trees, and you treat that for your log trees. But maybe there's parts of the farm that aren't super desirable, and you want to just make them really thick and ultra desirable to deer, and that's kind of what we're talking about today. And so let's take a look at this here. What do you guys think about this picture? What is this? What's going on here? Does anybody have any idea? Observations?
No undergrowth.
Yep. None. There's some big white oaks there, huh? How do they look, Paul?
Harvestable.
There you go. Yeah. And hey, look back here. Look at this. Look at this scaling going on here. Look at this guy. They're getting sick. Okay, there's a disease going on right now. You're going to be able to talk much more about it, but we're finding these big white oaks that all of a sudden, these grand white oaks that are 100 plus years old, that are all of a sudden starting to die. I don't know the reason for it. Maybe you've got a little bit of insight for it, but I took this picture here this spring. We're going to cut these trees, but I don't really know what to expect as far as the inside of them. So this is quite a waste. This is a waste of a ridge. You've got, time, something that none of us can control. Growing these big, beautiful trees, they're worth money, but maybe too much time has gone by. That combined with the fact that if I'm a deer, boy, I don't feel safe in here. There's nothing to eat. I'm basically just waiting for the acorns to drop. And so if you think about it, right, people would say, oh, that's an awesome hardwood ridge for a whitetail. Well, would you rather be able to go into the pantry anytime you want and eat whatever you want? Or would you rather basically survive when somebody else tells you when you can eat? And that's basically what a hardwood tree is doing. Deer can't reach up and pick those things off, and quite frankly, acorns, there's not even a good crop every year. And so this is a one-dimensional situation right here. Cut those trees, make a little bit of money, and let's thicken it up. A little bit of a different example. One of the best stands I've ever hunted in. This is the heavy-duty stand. Look at that timber back here. This is a hard edge, right? And so this stuff that looks impenetrable, even though the camera's kind of out of focus here, you want parts of your ground to look like that. They're safe in there. They're finding all different types of variety of vegetation. And so having pockets of your farm or your property in varying age classes of timber is a great thing. It's great for the browse. It's great for the travel. The reason this stand is so good is look at that hard edge right there, because it's all open, like mature timber right at the base of this draw, right here on the right. And then to the left, we've got, basically, this was an old field on the left that the farmer said, it's too wet, I'm done with it, and it just started growing up. So that's probably, I don't know, 15 years old or so, and it's just an amazing travel corridor, and deer going in there to bed, and it's just great. And so when it comes to your timber, we want to try to, get some variety going, in my opinion. Terminology. When we're talking about different ways to manage timber, you want to understand what the canopy is. The canopy is the top of the tree that gathers the sunlight. Some people call it the crown. Releasing is removing competing trees, and we want to remove the competing trees from all four sides, normally. The cambium layer is the area of the tree, the part of the tree that transports the energy between the roots and the leaves, right? So that cambium layer, if we're going to want to eliminate a tree, either with fire or a saw, we're disturbing the cambium layer, which basically is preventing the information from going back and forth and the nutrition from going back and forth. The tree's going to die. Okay, then a unit. Unit is the area you're focusing on altering. We call them burn units, cut units. Units are different areas. Like on my 39 acres, I'm going to have a north unit and a unit on the end of this east ridge. And so understanding some of that terminology is kind of the first step in managing your timber. Some of the considerations: consult a forester. Don't just dive into it, start hinge cutting everything. I think that's just a big mistake. I think there could be a time and place for hinge cutting. Not sure how you feel about hinge cutting. Time and place for it. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, though. Consult a forester. This is me talking with Bob Petrozelka out of Geode Forestry in southeast Iowa. Bob is a wealth of knowledge. We're talking about a walnut here and the financial maturity of that walnut and the quality or the grading of that walnut. I learned a lot. Bob is a consulting forester, so he costs money, right? And he's going to represent you if you're going to sell any timber. Instead of just working directly with a logger, get yourself a timber consultant. He's going to look out in your best interest. He's going to make money, that's how he does it, but he's going to prevent you from getting fleeced when it comes to selling your timber. Consulting forester is going to look out for your best interest and mark the trees that fit the goals of what your goals are. District foresters are free. They are state employees. I walked my ground with a district forester. We talked about composition. We identified different species of trees. We talked about programs that I could maybe get cost share incentive on if I wanted to make improvements and work on my ground. That sounds pretty good. If I'm going to get paid $300 or $400 an acre to improve my farm, I'm fired up about that. And so these resources here are really super valuable, especially with timber. Learn your species. Tree identification. How can you cut without knowing what you're cutting, right? So learn your species, set your goals, remove weed trees. So we got this big, beautiful walnut that's pretty much ready to go. Let's say, for example, it wasn't financially mature, but it was a good up-and-comer. We're going to probably remove the trees that are competing right around it so it can absorb its maximum amount of sunlight and grow the best it can. We're going to reduce the canopy. The canopy is preventing sunlight from reaching the rest of the vegetation. Think about your actions years down the road as well. When we cut, you can make quite a mess if you're going to log, right? Maybe don't do a clear cut on a certain section if your access route is going through that area that you're going to drop all of these trees down. So think about your actions and how it's going to affect years down the road, because once you cut a tree, you can't take that back. Girdling. Okay, so girdling is when we you take your saw and you just go right around the tree, and you're scarring the cambium layer. You're basically eliminating the ability for that tree to push nutrients from the roots up the tree. You're girdling it. Felling is cutting the tree down. We cut it down. Some people call it flush cut, a stump cut. When you cut that tree is going to try to regrow sometimes. So if you want that to happen, then don't treat it with a chemical. If you do want it to happen, don't, right? So what I've been told from some of my clients that I would consider in the upper echelon of whitetail management, they're very big into some of these stump cuts, because a tree, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to overstep my boundaries, it's something I'm learning about here. When you cut a tree down, that root system stays the same, and it's pushing a lot of nutrients now at mouth level for a whitetail, which is extremely valuable from a nutrition standpoint. It's going to get a lot of minerals. It's going to get a lot of different things that we may not think about. And so these stump cuts, some people are really big on them right now. And to me, it makes some sense. Then there's the hinge cut. The hinge cut is you're changing the growth structure of the tree. You're cutting it halfway or a third of the way, and it's falling over. It's still attached at that cambium layer to an extent, and so it's still able to send nutrients out. It's stressed, but it's still going to grow leaves. It's still going to grow branches. Deer are going to maybe browse on it. But these are nice for side cover. So if you have maybe a hillside that's going down, there's maybe a little bit of a kind of a nice flat bench. Deer like to bed on flat things like we do. Maybe do a little bit of hinge cutting in that area to provide it a sense of side cover or security next to where it's laying. Don't hinge cut everything. Don't flush cut everything. Don't girdle everything. Do a little bit of both or all three in different parts of your farm, and you're going to experience different results. If you want to increase the bedding in a piece of timber, you want to reduce the canopy between 80 and 100%. It's an aggressive cut. I'm going to take a ridge or two, and if those ridges are 5 acres, I'm probably going to do a bedding cut or a clear cut of maybe 1 or 2 acres of that. I don't want to bomb the whole ridge. I want to favor maybe where they're already wanting to bed, maybe on that southern exposure, and do a bedding cut. And I'm going to reduce 80 to 100% of the canopy in a certain area. If you want to improve for timber value, on the other hand, you're going to be leaving trees stand, right? You're going to be leaving trees that are maybe a third of its way through its life till it gets financially mature, and then you might have ones that are pretty much ready to go, but you're reducing the canopy in areas that are around those desirable trees. Open timber that you can see more than 100 yards in is not ideal for preferred bedding, just like that first picture we talked about. This timber may be mature, so perform TSI, harvest financially mature trees. Select certain areas to aggressively cut. Create specific bedding areas. When you do that, you create specific bedding areas and daytime browse. And then finally, when you do these aggressive clear cuts or bedding cuts, you're going to make a buck feel like he can be more secluded. You're going to make it difficult for them to see past 10 or 20 yards. So he's going to feel like he can seclude more, because that's what these old guys like. They want to be in their own spot. And also you're going to force him to move around to locate does. And so if he can just cover a ridge easily and just kind of, either with his nose or with his eyes, he will spend less time on your property. We're going to try to make him work for it by having to sneak through all of this young, thick regrowth and trees that are down and whatnot. Okay, moving on to food sources. Deer are concentrate selectors. Okay, so what that means is they are highly selective of the species and the specific part of the plant. We're still trying to understand a deer's true diet. They will eat different combinations of things to fulfill their needs. So like I like chicken wings. I like buffalo wings. I love them, actually. But I'm not going to eat them every single meal, right? That's not going to be good for me. I'm going to have some spinach. We're going to eat some hard-boiled eggs. We're going to have some chips. We're going to, I mean, there's a variety, right? So we all eat that way, and so do deer. They need, and so it goes back to diversity. And what I'm trying to get at is that native browse and diversity in your food sources is where you're going to get your maximum results from your wildlife. Diversity. Early succession, old field, massed, like apple trees and oak trees, forbs, and yes, food plots, right? So these are all different types of food sources. Native browse, massed, agriculture. As a deer manager, you want to understand a variety of these. I would say that the common thread, again, around my network that are shooting the top end deer in their area and growing them, right, really focus on native regeneration. And so if you have an old field or pasture, the answer may not be to just plant, it's going to be either corn or beans now, or it's going to be clover and brassicas. Consider killing the grass, the brome, because that's useless to a whitetail. Useless to a lot of wildlife is brome. Kill it. Start with a fresh start. There's a seed bank in there. Mother Nature has a seed bank of native vegetation, weeds, brambles, flowers, grasses. This early succession is letting Mother Nature come back and do her thing, right? And as long as we keep the grasses, the brome out of there, you're going to have some an explosion of colors and variety, and I bet you'll see a lot of activity in those areas. So if you've got a place where it's not good for equipment, it's tough for whatever reason, explore this idea of early succession in old field. Food plots, everybody loves talking about food plots. They're very important, I think, from a hunting perspective, especially in addressing things that for certain parts of the year, you're going to attract and hold deer for a period of stress, right? So that's the goal with food plots, is you're going to attract them into weapon range, but you're also providing nutrition during weak periods of time. Remember, when you're doing food plots, you're farming, right? Prepare to be frustrated. It's going to happen. It's how you get better those having failures. Perennial versus annual plots. So perennials like clover and alfalfa, things that grow back every year once you establish them. These are mainly providing food in the spring, fall, and early winter. Okay, on the other hand, when we plant our annuals, they're planted every year, like corn and soybeans, cereal grain, oats and rye and winter wheat, brassicas. These things need to be planted every year. They don't naturally come back. They might volunteer here and there, but in general, they're not going to come back like a stand of clover will. And so annuals are planted every year, and they're providing food mainly during the summer and late winter. Some of the considerations, again, you want to determine your goals and adapt accordingly. Do you want to have good archery hunting in October? Probably consider a smaller food plot. That's something that can be, and when you have a smaller food plot, it's going to be browsed hard, right? So clover is a really good one for that. Clover can be browsed really hard. It puts out a lot of tonnage for deer, and it's going to be in bow range. On the other hand, if you want to hold deer on your farm and attract them and keep them away from the neighbors as much as possible, you want to have larger destination food sources in the wintertime, right? Or after gun season, when they're getting all pushed around, they come into your farm and now they have this big grain food plot. And so you need to determine what your goals are and adapt accordingly. Controlling the competition is just as important as when you seed down a food plot. And so learning your herbicide application, understanding seed rates. I'm not going to get into all of the different, seed rates and whatnot. Trying to keep this relatively high level, but that's really important. Is if you're gonna choose to plant something, learn how you prep the site ahead of time using chemical. Learn how to prep the soil or enhance the soil over time with fertilizer and with lime. Lee Lukoski told me one day, he said that he thinks the single most important thing for putting inches on a whitetail is having the healthiest soil possible. He says so many guys overlook liming and fertilizing. He said, but that plant is nothing but a mechanism for getting minerals out of the ground and into the deer. Soil health. So we just did soil samples on that little piece of ground that I bought. We found out the pH is pretty darn low. So we're going to hammer it with lime over the next every year and try to neutralize it, and hopefully we'll have a healthier food plot for the deer. And of course you want to plant at the correct depth and rate. There's a lot of great information on how to plant this stuff, what the rate is, what the depth is. Focus on that, because you're going to spend all of this money, all of this time. You're waiting on the good conditions and the rain to stop, and then everything needs to line up to plant food plots. Make sure you're doing it at the right depth. Herd management. This is getting into, okay, we talked about how we're going to manipulate the ground. Now we got to discuss what decisions we're going to make from a hunting perspective to have the absolute best experience out there in a good, healthy herd. You want to learn to identify a deer's body size. That's crucial if your goal is big whitetails. Good bucks grow into great bucks, right? Age is the theme. Bucks have unique personalities. You want to observe them and predict how they fit in. It seems to be that these bucks that get older, they want to be by themselves, but some of them become awfully dominant, right? And some of those dominant old bucks may not be the big, high-scoring bucks that some of us desire, right? So choosing what deer to shoot is part of your holistic management plan. And of course, taking enough does if the observations warrant it. So some people are in the camp of not shooting does. More deer equals a higher opportunity of having a big buck. And again, I'm in the camp, and I've talked with I've learned from a lot of people that think that balancing the herd is how you have the healthiest, largest deer. Part of this herd management, a huge tool, is trail cameras. So trail cameras are going to give us a snapshot in time when a deer was there. I see a lot of people ruin their hunting seasons with these things. They check them too often, right? And now we have cell cameras, and that makes it, you can be a lot more unobtrusive to your farm, right? But don't check them too often. I like to set mine in July, let them soak for a month. I'm not hunting in July or August, right? So just let them soak, let them capture information, check them sparingly. I know everybody's excited to see what I'm going to be hunting this year, right? But I think that you're putting more chips into having a good, successful fall if you keep the pressure off of your deer herd certain times of the year. Of course, you want to observe the direction of travel and the time stamp. Where are those deer coming from as they approach the camera? Tells you a lot about maybe being able to pinpoint where they're at. And some good places to run trail cameras, key in on points, corners, fence gaps, trail scrapes, holes, just places that are different. This is a pretty good example here of two different bucks that use the same trail within a 24-hour period. Look at the body size difference, right? So rack does not equal age. Look at this guy here. Borderline 200-inch whitetail. He has a lot going on. This buck's only 4 years old. Okay, hunted him in 2020. And yes, I was hunting a 4-year-old deer because I wanted to shoot that thing, right? So it goes back to not limiting yourself, being ashamed of shooting a younger deer if that's what charges you. On the other hand, other people would have said, you know what, I'm going to see what he turns into next year. And that's fine. It's ultimately your tag, and what you decide to do with it is your business, right? But pretty cool buck here. That guy, he really took me for a ride. It's amazing that that deer is 4 years old, and I know that because I had pictures of him when he was 3 and 2. This is pretty cool here. 2 different age class bucks. Can we all agree that one of these is younger than the other? Okay, this guy on the right looks like a young racehorse, right? Long legs, kind of a little bit of a taper on the left sides. Maybe not an amazing picture of him, but I thought this was a cool one because this buck on the left here, we just found him dead. In fact, the neighbor found him dead, and his teeth were about wore flat. And the previous owner thinks that this buck here on the left was 10 years old, right? So 2 different pictures. Well, when you look at the racks, man, that guy on the right has a lot higher scoring rack than that guy on the left. Pretty neat. Okay, so rack doesn't always equal age class. Big mature bucks, 4.5 plus years old in this part of the country. 4.5-year-old deer is just starting to get into his prime, in my opinion. We're blessed to be in a state where it's the easiest, pretty much the easiest state in the country to get deer at 4.5 or older, right? And that's where they express their largest potential at 5, 6 years old. They want the thickest cover for the most part. They're reclusive. They don't want to be bothered. They're very observant. They don't tolerate pressure for the most part. They do establish core areas. Many of them shrink their core areas as they get older. Not all of them, but many of them do. They need sanctuaries, areas where they're not going to be bothered. And they also don't tolerate other dominant bucks in the fall, for the most part. So where this comes into play is if I have this guy on the right that's 3.5 years old, and he's living with this guy on the left that's the king of the farm, that's pushing everybody around, that buck very well may go and say, I'm out of here. This guy's beating the crap out of me. I'm heading a mile to the south where you may never see him again, right? If we want to grow big deer, we want to get them to that age class, we need to remove those dominant bucks and let these young guys grow up. I just wanted to share this one. This is one of my favorite trail cam pictures I've ever got. Just a big old beast working a scrape of a November morning. Look how short his legs are. This is kind of deceiving because it's tapered because his head's perfectly up in the air. When you see a deer and his legs are short looking like that, that's a mature buck. Legs will tell you a lot. Another thing that will tell you a lot is if there's any sort of sway in his back. Look at this guy here. Look at his shoulders up above from his shoulders, and there's kind of a drop. I mean, that looks like a cow with a rack, right? And so being able to identify body and look at body characteristics is a great way to tell the age of an animal. Okay, some considerations of as I think we're pretty much getting close to wrapping up here. We're going to talk a little bit about where these deer are going, right? So we're managing, for our farms. We're planting food plots. We're burning. We're cutting timber. But ultimately, we got to think. Okay, we're making these decisions, but where are the deer going? Where are they going? They're bedding in the morning. They're going to food in the afternoon. Okay, everybody in this room knows that, right? They're looking for does and they're looking for water during the rut, and you want to try to intercept them in between. It's as easy as that. The goal is to intercept them in between the bedding and the food, or the food and the bedding. Occasionally, you can be in the bedding area if you think you nailed it, right? And he's going to come right in and lay down in front of you. Or you can maybe be at the food source that he's going to come to and you're going to arrow him. But when it comes to getting out and educating deer, whether you're getting out of a morning hunt or getting out of an evening hunt, that's when the gig can be up pretty quick and he can figure you out. And so I like to hunt in between. They pass through, they're not in front of you, you can get out, you can get in and out of there. Okay, so how do they get to where they're going, right? They're going in a way that makes them feel safe for the most part. If you ever notice deer in the timber, like on a ridge, they'll be a lot, well, maybe not even necessarily on a ridge. Deer in the evening are a lot more on edge than in the morning. They've been out all night eating, browsing, hanging out with each other, and they're working their way back to bed. They're a lot more relaxed, right? And so you want to think about how they are, what their demeanor is, and the areas they're going to travel to wherever they want to go, right? Also, they're going to get there in ways that they can smell what's ahead of them or around them one way or another. There's a lot of different ways to think about wind and thermals and whatnot, but in general, think about these things as you're trying to pinpoint, their travel routes. Edge, going back to this picture, this edge here. Edges change. It can be terrain change. It can be a vegetation change. Hard features. They like lines in areas where this vegetation changes, and so those are going to be some of the hottest spots on the farm, whether you're running cameras or hunting. Here's a good example. A lot going on here. Old fence line, alfalfa field in the back. Some CRP right here in the corner. There's our fire break. We're on the edge of some timber. I mean, I would expect to have some sort of action here. Here's an old dam with young locust trees growing up in it now. A lot of rubs on here, right? So this is just a little area of change that they're traveling through. Great place to run a camera. So ask yourself, where are the changes on your farm? Where are the terrain changes? Where does water features maybe adapt their movement? Where are they whenever I'm coming in to hunt them? Where are they going? Are they going to their bedding area? Or are they going to go to maybe a larger field, and on their way out they're going to hit this little ridge top and kind of stretch and stage up for a little while? So you try to think about those things, where they're ultimately going to go. And then from a hunting perspective, where are you going to hunt when the wind can be true and false? And how can I access those areas undetected? A false wind would be an area that terrain is affecting the wind, right? And so you have a wind direction, but that terrain is changing the direction of that wind. And so you want to normally hunt up either high or hunt in areas where wind can come across and not be interfered with terrain to have a true wind. Lastly, you're going to be doing your homework, studying maps, thinking about the deer's basics, accessing and hunting undetected, hunt, learn, enjoy, repeat, right? And it's all about enjoying it and repeating, learning, adapting, pushing yourself. Do your research and understand what a whitetail's needs are, right? And especially whenever it comes to food sources, timber composition, grasses. You want to manipulate the habitat based on your goals. So if you want to have you want to have your up and comer nice straight tall walnuts, don't go hinge cutting all of them. I think that's pretty safe to say. On the other hand, don't just let your trees grow up and have big canopy and let the forest floor kind of get nice and open and park-like if you want to have good bedding in those spots. Diversity is essential. Avoid the monoculture. I know there are guys that even will have food plots, and then they'll pop in pockets of miscanthus grass or switchgrass, and they'll literally plant and spray and mow around them so they can just have diversity even in that food plot. That's maybe more advanced, but there's nothing wrong with that. Fire and chainsaws are the two most powerful management tools. So if a guy doesn't have a drill and sprayer and whatnot, you can still do an amazing amount of improvement for your whitetails and your wildlife with fire and a chainsaw. So learning and being around burning and being around people that are cutting in the timber with a chainsaw is invaluable. You can go to seminars from the state to learn how to do this stuff as well. And so interacting with your local county service center is going to be a really good beneficial resource for you to learn, especially fire and timber improvement. You want to learn your herbicides, your general herbicides on how to control, say, clover. You worked really hard, you established your clover, and in a couple years there's going to be some grasses growing up in it, right? So what can we use to make sure that all the hard work we put into growing that stand of clover isn't all for nothing, right? So learn your herbicides, learn your seed rates and planting depths, pay attention to the instructions on the bag with whatever your food plot you're planting. And then lastly, don't measure yourself against others. Maximize your fulfillment. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff I covered that you want to dive deeper into. We have a YouTube channel, and the most popular playlist on our YouTube channel is called Land Beat. Land Beat is going to have all kinds of awesome videos on food plots, timber stand improvement, burning, understanding the differences in all of this. And so we probably are pumping out a video a week on here. And so tremendous resource, Land Beat, Whitetail Properties on YouTube. And then lastly, selfish plug for myself, if anybody is interested in buying, selling, if they have a relative that has been hinting at selling, if you ever would want to explore investing in land, I'm here to help. I do this for a full-time living. I'm not a land manager, right? I just happen to be passionate about it. I don't do that for a living. I sell ground for a living. And so if anybody would ever need any help in that regard, please check me out on whitetailproperties.com.